Last time, we focused on how Nintendo brought virtual reality to home consoles. Even though the Famicom 3D system used only an active shutter and not lenses and displays, it presented new possibilities for developers of the time. But how were they able to utilize them, and who else stepped into the VR industry? That will be our today's topic. Put on your red and blue glasses and we are away. Most of the Famicom 3D system's impressive library of 8 games were various flying and shooting games. But in this video, I'd like to talk about more interesting games of other genres. For example, let's take Highway Star, slightly better known as Rad Racer, a racing simulator developed and published by Square in October 1987. The player had to drive from point A to point B in time, while trying not to lose speed or crash. Only the Japanese version of the game was supported by the Famicom 3D system. I'll warn you right away that in this video the picture is divided in two for convenience, but in reality it was constantly flickering with left and right frames interchangeably. But I'll spare your eyes. So, in the US edition, the game had a stereoscopic mode for anaglyph glasses. The game would split into a blue and red image. I personally can add that we sometimes tried to figure out what the hell was going on with the game when pressing select. However, it turned out to be advanced technology and we're just cavemen struggling to grasp the power of technology before us. Another 3D racing game was Famicom Grand Prix 2 3D Hot Rally, released in 1988 for the Famicom Disk System. The notable thing about it was that the game used various Nintendo characters like Mario and Luigi as racers. Moreover, it was here where Luigi got its appearance. On the game's cover, he is taller than Mario and has a different mustache. The game itself boasted as many as 3 tracks with forks and the ability to crash your ride. Not visually, of course. It simply had an amount of HP that was depleted by careless driving. There was a 3D mode in this game, and that was pretty much all it did, frankly speaking. Mostly because of the name, rather than content, we should also mention Fun Shuriken Ankoku no Mao. It's kind of a fighting game released in 1988 for the Famicom Disk System. The player would move the character from left to right through a series of levels with a single enemy. Enemies could be kicked with one button and punched with the other, and after achieving victory, the player was sent to the next stage. In addition, various weather conditions could also interfere, such as wind or lightning that would strike the character. The 3D mode didn't add anything to the game except the depth of the background behind the characters, but it wasn't exactly demanding, so why not add it just for the hell of it? I also get shot if I don't mention the 3D Battles of World Runner. This is yet another 3D shooter created by Square in 1987 for the Famicom Disk System. The game's protagonist would simply run forward, shooting enemies and jumping over obstacles. What else is there to ask for? The story with the 3D picture here is the same as with Rad Racer, Famicom 3D system for the Japanese version, anaglyph glasses for the American one. In general, it's safe to say that Nintendo made its move with the Famicom, but it did not find a better use for the 3D picture than to enhance the player's forward motion. Besides, the glasses remained exclusive to the Japanese market, hence the shift for games to start using the anaglyphs. You'll probably laugh, but that same year, 1987, Sega released their own version of these glasses. Their response, released a little later, was called Sega Scope 3D glasses, also known as the Sega 3D glasses and even Oculus 3D, if you're watching this from Portugal. Long story short, the naming wasn't the best part. But the creator of the device was none other than the Mark Henry himself, a great man who took part in the creation of the second Sonic, the original Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, and a bunch of other things, and the architecture of most PlayStations on top of everything else. These fancy specs were intended for the Sega Master System. There was a total of 8 games that supported this thing, believe it or not. Of interest, there was Outrun 3D, released in 1988, the second game in the legendary racing series. Old-timers say that the impact of the first game could be visible in such series as Need for Speed, Burnout, and Test Drive, so legendary is not an overstatement. The sequel, on the other hand, boasted a whole bunch of upgrades, like several difficulty levels, a more complex track layout, and different weather conditions. As for the 3D mode, well, it certainly was there. The mode added a sense of speed, and that was pretty much it. It didn't have to do anything else really. Space Harrier was a no less legendary series. Naturally, we are interested in the part that has 3D in its name, which was also released in 1988. We were given control over a character who would run and fly on a colored chessboard, shooting away at enemies. Of course, the game had a story, but hardly any more sophisticated than a good hero is on a mission to save the world from another big meanie. The game was quite hardcore, as the protagonist would die at first hit. And the action, especially with the FPS drops caused by the 3D component, was actually quite dynamic. There was a funny thing with the 3D here. You see, if you died after scoring enough points, you could use a cheat code that would disable the stereoscopic effects. It's because of them that you're now enjoying a footage with so many artifacts. Why the developers decided not to take pity on people without expensive glasses and make the ability to switch accessible right away, as in the majority of such games, is unclear.
Why? Because it's so much fun, Chan! Get it?
Maze Hunter 3D was another game of 1988 worth mentioning. The player would be seeing a labyrinth from above, while controlling the protagonist trying to get him out of there. The maze was infested with monsters, but is that a problem for someone armed with the ferocious stick of doom? The game itself is quite addictive. The 3D component here is even more fun, because you cannot turn it off at all. But I've read a lot of reviews saying that the depth effect in this game is most beautiful on the Master System. For example, when jumping, the protagonist would appear to get closer to the player. All of that looked very smooth, and this was before Mode 7 that uses sprite stretching. What's funny is that the 3D didn't do anything new for this game, but it looked awesome, and that's what matters. And I think it's worth saying a couple of words about Poseidon Wars 3D. What's special about it is that it's a direct successor of Sega's Sub-Rock 3D, which opened the previous video on the topic. The graphics, of course, suffered a slight downgrade as a result of moving to a home system, but the gameplay was quite dynamic for 1988. The player controlled a heavily armed powerboat, but now he wasn't just scoring points, but moving up the career ladder from US Naval Cadet to Admiral. Definitely a worthy objective for shooting red dots at pixel airplanes and ships. In conclusion, the same thing can be said about both Sega and Nintendo. The 3D technology was implemented pretty nicely, but neither of the two companies really understood what to do with it. In the future, this will become quite an issue, and I will be sure to tell you about it. Another contender in the 1987 race was the company called VPL Research. Essentially, they're the pioneers of the industry. This is proven at least by the fact that the founder of the company, Gerald Lanier, was the one to suggest the term virtual reality. I must say he looks exactly like a typical scientist in the field of data visualization and biometric technologies. So, in that very same year, 1987, the company created the iPhone. And here, Apple stands said it was a cutting-edge masterpiece of technology never seen before. Okay, just kidding. This phone had the word I in the beginning, not the letter I. It also should be said that the year 1987 is not a unanimously accepted date. Different sources mention different dates, and the exact time is known only to Jaron himself. But the day and year don't matter. What matters is that the headset could boast a decent picture with head position tracking. Combined with the Data Glove, released by the same team, They got a whole virtual system that essentially allowed to experience low polygonal but full-fledged VR. And everything would have went splendid, the path to the future now open, if all this stuff didn't cost unsavory six-figure sums. For example, it is known that the complete system for iPhone with all the peripherals costs about $250,000. All the devices individually also cost a bit more than modern controllers and headsets, to put it mildly. So alas, VPL Research eventually went bankrupt. By the way, since I'm talking about gloves, the Nintendo Power Glove should definitely get a few choice words.
I love the Power Glove. It's so bad.
Oh, kid, you had no idea how right you were. This thing came out in 1989, and in its 30 plus years of existence, the Power Glove has been shat on by everyone and his brother. I'm not going to miss the chance and shall gladly contribute, especially since it would be a sin not to mention the first home motion controller while talking about VR. In a nutshell, modern analogs use accelerometers and gyroscopes to determine their position in space. Nintendo was limited by the technology of their time, so they used ultrasonic speakers on the glove and microphones on the TV. Based on how much sound was coming into the microphones, the positions and angle were calculated. Everything sounds good on paper, but in reality, have you ever been in a situation where two people are trying to say something at the same time? Same with the Power Glove, because even the slightest background noise became an obstacle for it, making the glove going crazy and disconnecting. This made it almost impossible to play, neither with a motion controller, not with an integrated joystick. The icing on the cake was that the whole thing cost $80, which is actually quite a hefty amount. In 1991, VR arcade machines continued to evolve. The Virtuality Group company had released quite a number of virtual reality arcade machines under a joint name, Virtuality. They allowed you to either sit or stand, depending on the model. Each of them had two small LCD screens, 4 speakers, and a microphone. By using a magnetic tracking system, the stereoscopic display could respond to head movements to change the display depending on what the player would be looking at in the game. The position of the joystick corresponded with the movements of the player's virtual hand, and the button on the joystick moved it. These arcade machines actually saw some decent video games, like Pac-Man VR. This made an important contribution to the popularization of virtual reality. It's one thing to fantasize about how cool it is to see and manipulate a virtual cube in a room, but it's another thing to play the virtual reality Pac-Man with your homie. Sega, however, wasn't giving up, and in 1993 they came up with a major announcement. At several expos, they teased not just something, but a VR headset for Genesis. Just think about what it could have been, given the decent graphics of an 8-bit console. 4 games already seemed to be in development, but alas, first, the Sega VR release was delayed and then cancelled altogether due to production issues and headaches that it was giving. Sega, of course, tried to excuse themselves by saying that mankind isn't ready for such games. But they're not that good at it even now, in 2023. The games weren't released either. By the way, here's a fun fact. In 2019, a footage with the soundtrack of the game Iron Hammer was uploaded to YouTube, and in the menu of this build you can see no other than Sonic and Tails. They made it even here. The cancellation of home VR didn't stop Sega from creating the Mega Visor display headset for arcades and amusement parks. It was released in 1994 in cooperation with Virtuality Group, and the product of their only collaboration was hailed as one of the most advanced of its time. It was used with just 3 games: the Rail Shooters, Planet Adventure, and Space Mission for amusement parks, and a shoot-em-up called Denno Senki Netmerk for an arcade machine. I must say that even though low amounts of polygons give away the age of these games, they don't look like something completely prehistoric. A good example of how quantity has turned into quality. What happened next in the VR industry was such an epic fiasco that its echoes can be heard to this day. I'm sure you've already guessed what I'm talking about, but I'd like to talk about this disaster in all the details, so I'll be waiting for you in the next video. For now, all we can is sum up that VR has become a new field for game developers, although a field not fully understood and a bit hard to work in. But as we know today, everything was just getting started. On this cheerful note, I invite you to the comments and remind you of the possibility to smash the like and subscribe buttons to get more great content. Okay, I better start making the video for the next week, so stay tuned.